I'm Nick Knutson, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On this week's episode, we'll cover Tim Tebow signing with the Jaguars. Tim Tebow going to, I'm just kidding, guys. We're not going to talk about Tim Tebow this week. We did that last week, Will. I know Will want to do all four topics on Tebow, but we're going to mix it up tonight, Will. Sorry about that, man. We're going to do potential sophomore standouts, reason for defensive optimism, our recruiting wish list by position group, and a look at the career of the late Tim PAULK. Will, how's it going this week?
Hey, it's going pretty well, man. I'm very disappointed you didn't want to do Tim Tebow for 4 straight segments. Turn this thing into the Skip Bayless Gator content or something like that. But no, I mean, we got really good response last week for some of that stuff. Hopefully, if people haven't seen that, go back and check that out. Certainly like and subscribe on the YouTube channel, the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. The more subscribers we get, the more it helps us out. If you like this content, you'll get more of it if you like and subscribe. So certainly we appreciate everybody supporting the venture. But, hey, I'm excited to talk about the Gators during the offseason because, there's not a whole lot going on right now. So it gives us a little bit of an opportunity to maybe freelance a little bit.
Yeah, and you and I have no problem talking Gator football any time of the year. But I do want to say a special thank you to everybody who subscribed. That subscription number went up quite a bit on YouTube last week. So we definitely want to give a shout out to everybody, say thank you for that. All right, Will, let's get over to 2 bits. First, we're going to stop by an article by Demetrius Harvey of All Gators at SAI.com. They do good work over there. Be sure to check him out. He wrote a good piece this week identifying the 5 Florida sophomores who are set to make a major impact this season. We'll put the link in the show notes for anyone who wants to check it out. But, Will, the 5 he identified: wide receiver Xavier Henderson, safety Rashad Torrance, defensive lineman Princely Umanmielen, guard Josh Brown, and corner Avery Helm. Will, which of the 5 are you most excited about heading into 2021?
I mean, it's Braun, and it's not even really all that close, right? I mean, the offensive line for Florida has been a little bit sketchy over the 3 years with Dan Mullen there. I mean, I think when you had Martez Ivey and Fred Johnson, some of those guys out there in that first year in 2018, they were pretty good. But in 19, they struggled. In 20, they struggled. And now you have to replace the whole left side of the offensive line as well as improve the right side of the offensive line from last year. Braun got a little bit of playing time last year. He wasn't one of the main stalwarts, but he was in there to back things up. And when they tried to make some changes on the right-hand side of the offensive line, Braun was one of the guys that they brought in that game against LSU. Now, things didn't really improve all that much on the offensive line against LSU, but I think we all know that this offense is going to be different this year. And one of the things that needs to be different is the offensive line needs to be better. So I'm really excited to see what Braun can do and what he can bring to the offense.
I think that's the most important of the 5. I think the one I'm most excited about, though, is Xavier Henderson. I mean, with the absence of Kyle Pitts and Trevon Grimes headed to the NFL and Kadarius Toney, there's going to be a need to step up in that area. And we saw Henderson on the field a lot. He didn't get to see the ball a whole lot. I know there's some other receivers who are looking up their statistics this year, but I like I think he can get in there. I mean, he only had 9 receptions last season, Will. That number is sure to go up. And I mean, at 6'3" in the red zone, you'd like to see him be a little bit of a threat.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously they're going to need to replace some weapons, right, with Pitts and Toney leaving. So Henderson's going to be a big part of that. Obviously, we all know his brother and the success that he had at Florida, and hopefully he can sort of replicate that on the other side of the ball. Umanmielen's the other guy I think is sort of an interesting discussion point there. I mean, obviously he's going to be behind Zach Carter there at defensive end, but he did show some flashes last year, had a couple of sacks, and in a Todd Grantham defense where you figure that he's going to really try to get after the quarterback in some interesting ways this year, that may free up the defensive end for some sacks and some turnovers. And, we saw what he did with Ja'Kai Polite. We saw what he did with Jabari Zuniga. We saw what he did with Jonathan Grenard. Last year, didn't have the spring practice, didn't have the fall practice, and maybe that hindered his ability to sort of find and train that guy in that particular role. So Umanmielen may be somebody who can come in sort of as a specialty pass rusher on third down, or allow Zach Carter to slide inside when they want to get extra pass rush there on the quarterback and be able to get after it a little bit.
It's a good segue into 4 bits in an article titled "Todd Grantham Doesn't Care What You Think. Florida's defense is about to be nasty." Neil Blackmon of Saturday Down South believes there's reasons for optimism on the defensive side of the ball in Gainesville this fall. And Will, it's just such a different the title of the article is such a different vibe from the narrative that's gone on basically since the beginning of the 2020 season. And really, I like to quote from Mullen in there saying, our margin of error is very small, but we have great depth, better than it's been since I've been here. That'll give us a chance to not just be really good, but great. Will, where's your optimism level with the defense right now?
On a scale of 0 to 10, it's probably like a 4. I mean, I don't like Todd Grantham as a defensive coordinator. I haven't liked him since he came in. I mean, it wasn't that I thought he was bad. It was that I thought he was kind of average, that he wasn't really moving the needle. It's what I wrote back in 2018. It's what I wrote after this season when I said, hey, we got a bad one after having a couple of good ones, and that's kind of what you get with Grantham. The key to the defense this year is going to be Gervon Dexter. I mean, the defensive tackle is such an important position for Grantham's defense. And you even saw it a couple of years ago in 2019 when they started guys like Tadaro Slayton to start the season. They weren't able to get much push. And then transfers like Adam Schuler came in, started to make a big difference. You really saw it in the Tennessee game. They had a goal line stand against Tennessee that turned into a safety real early in that game that really sort of made it clear that Florida's defensive line was going to dominate. And they just didn't have that last year at all. The defensive tackles weren't able to do that. Obviously, there's a couple of transfers coming in, but those transfers are sort of taking the place of the guys who are leaving in Slayton and Kyrie Campbell. So that's where I think you need a guy like Dexter to really be a difference maker there in the middle. And he's got the pedigree, right? He's a 5-star guy, put up unbelievable stats, showed flashes last year. If those flashes turn into consistent production, then the defense can be really, really good. But you get one injury up front to any one of those 3 guys at defensive tackle, and I think it might be some rough sledding at points.
Dexter's development's absolutely going to be key. What have you heard about Valentino and Newkirk, though, up the middle? Because I think that was definitely the Achilles heel of the defense last year.
Yeah, I mean, they're both Power 5 guys, right? I mean, Valentino played a lot at Penn State, seems to have a leadership attitude, which I think might be something that was missing last year. But these are not guys who are going to be, I don't think, going to be all SEC level defenders. I think they're going to be space eaters who hopefully keep pulling guards off of the linebackers. And that'll sort of be, so if the linebackers are flying around and making plays, that'll be because those guys are getting some push and really starting to cause problems. But that's one thing that I think people miss from last year is that the defensive ends, Cox and Carter didn't necessarily get a whole lot of pressure, but at the same time, there wasn't really any pressure up the middle, and pressure up the middle is how you allow those defensive ends to sort of pin their ears back. I think the defense will be better this year. I mean, I give it a 4 just because I'm not expecting them to be a lockdown defense. I don't think that's probably a reasonable ask after losing a bunch of guys to the NFL and coming off of the season that they had last year and who they're going to have to start, especially at the corner position. But I think they're going to be a lot better than last year. The question in my mind is, are they going to be better against Alabama and Georgia? I know they'll be better against Vanderbilt and Missouri and South Carolina. Question is, will they be better against Alabama? Will they be better against Georgia? That's where I have some doubts.
How much of this is, I'm not making excuses for last year's defense. It was what it was last year, but looking at what college football is today, the idea of a great defense today is completely different than it was even the last time the Gators competed seriously for a national title in 2006 and 2008. Those defenses were dominant. There's not many defenses like that in college football these days. So what's the idea? I mean, if we got a defense that's really kind of keeping it under 20 most games, that's pretty solid, right?
I mean, so they still rank defenses 1 to 121 or however many teams there are in FBS. I think you need to be top 20, right? I mean, I think if you look at the playoff history, teams that are not the only team that's made it to the playoffs consistently with bad defenses is Oklahoma. And that's because they play in the Big 12 and nobody has a good defense because they have an absolutely elite offense, or at least they did with Kyler Murray and Baker Mayfield. And when that offense took a little bit of a step back, all of a sudden they got upset a couple of times last year with Spencer Rattler, right? And so in the Big 12, I think you can get away with that. I don't think you can get away with that in the SEC. You're going to need a top 20 defense and probably a top 5 offense in order to make it, or you kind of got to switch that, right?
Yeah.
You have to have a top 5 defense and a top 20 offense. So I ask you next year, with Emory Jones taking over, what's more likely, a top 5 offense or a top 20 offense? I think probably people would say top 20 offense, which means the defense is going to have to be top 5. And you could be nasty while still giving up 27 points a game, right? It's just a question of who are you playing against. If you're playing against Ole Miss and Alabama and some of those high flyers in the SEC, hey, you may give up some points, but at the same time, can you get the stop when you need to get the stop? And last year, the defense was never able to get a stop.
Yeah, key moments. Key moments are really the new way to play the game. It feels like. All right, 6 bits, Will, and this was a question you posed. I like this one. If you can improve one area of recruiting at one specific position group, what would you choose and why?
Well, I mean, based on what I said earlier, this was pretty easy for me. It's defensive tackle, right? I mean, the reality is that Florida has not been real good at bringing in consistent numbers at defensive tackle, and then they have not been real good at getting rotations over a 2 or 3 year period of guys at defensive tackle. That's one of the reasons why they had to go out and get Valentino and Newkirk, is that they haven't brought guys in on the defensive line in the middle. Now, they brought in a ton of bucks, right? There have been a ton of guys on the outside, but they haven't really brought in high level, high performing guys other than Dexter on the interior. And that's going to have to change, because in the SEC in particular, but in college football in general, you get these quarterbacks who are dual threat, who are running RPOs, who are forcing the defensive ends into situations where they can't necessarily, if they cheat, they're going to get beat, because the quarterback is making a read based on what that defensive end makes, what the choice the defensive end makes. Now, if the defensive tackle comes in and busts his guy back 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage, it screws up the entire play. And I mean, how many times last year did Florida have a defensive tackle bust into the backfield and really disrupt a play? Maybe like twice. And so that's something that needs to happen on a more regular basis. And that's only going to happen if the recruiting picks up there.
I'm going to stay on the line, but I'm going to go to the offensive side. And just for the record, so offensive line for me, Bama won the Joe Moore Award last year for the nation's best offensive line. And obviously comparing yourself to Bama and anything is whatever, but we're the University of Florida. We expect to compete for SEC and national titles. They're the gold standard right now. So what are they doing? Let's look at them. You had Alex Leatherwood was a 5-star prospect, first-round pick for the Raiders. At guard, Deontay Brown, Panthers, a 6th-round pick for the Panthers, 4-star prospect. Landon Dickerson transferred from Florida State, but he's a 4-star prospect. 2nd-rounder with the Eagles, Emil Igior, 4-star prospect, still on the roster at Bama. Evan Neal, 5-star prospect at right tackle, projected 1st-round pick for next year. And it blew me away. Even Chris Owens, who filled in for a couple starts on that line, 4-star prospect. So nothing but 4 and 5 stars starting for Alabama, which is the gold standard, which you're trying to catch. So all in all, their top 6 players are all 4 or 5-star players, 3 which were just selected in the draft, along with the future first-round picks, almost surefire 1st-round pick. So looking at what Florida's got coming in this year, Garage 4-star, Braun 4-star, and this is all going off 24/7 Sports, by the way. Ethan White's a 3-star at center, Stuart Reese 3-star, and DeLance was a 4, and Michael Tarquin potentially could come in at right tackle. They're also a 4-star. You lost 2 guys to the NFL. Forsyth was a 3-star, and Heggie was a 3-star. Forsyth was the first Gator offensive lineman selected since Juwan Taylor went to Jackson in the 2nd round of the 2019 draft. All right. In terms of the NFL here, no Gator offensive lineman has gone in the 1st round since DJ Humphries went to Arizona with the 24th pick in the 2015 draft. Outside of the Pouncey brothers, Kenyatta Walker has gone in the top 20, is the only other offensive lineman to go in the top 20 since the year 2000 here for the University of Florida. Just to give you an idea here, if you go back, 5 offensive lineman 1st-round picks. So DJ Humphrey was the last one. The 5th one, you go DJ Humphreys in 2015, Mike Pouncey to Miami in 2011, Marquise in 2010 to Pitt, 2001 Kenyatta Walker to Tampa Bay, and the 5th one is Mo Collins to Oakland in 1998. Same draft with Fred Taylor and Jacquez Green, by the way, just for reference of who he was going out with. For Bama, if you do the same exercise, you get 6 linemen in the 1st round since 2013. And you want to know why Bama's doing what they're doing. I think it's up front in that offensive side of the ball. They're able to get that push.
Well, I suspect that you would get the same thing if you looked at their defensive line and said who's been drafted in the 1st round.
Well, Florida's had some defensive linemen drafted they've done okay on the defensive front in terms of 1st-round picks.
Well, that's absolutely true, right? I mean, I'm not going to argue with you that Florida has not been putting out an enormous amount of talent to the NFL. Now, you could argue, is that a recruiting thing? Is that a development thing? Is that a Charlie Weiss thing and a Will Muschamp thing, as opposed to recruiting under Dan Mullen? But I mean, Hevesy really other than the Pounceys, there's not a huge reputation there for development. I mean, I think there's a lot of sort of tangential stuff in terms of what was going on at Mississippi State, but we've seen how Dan Mullen can sort of paper over holes that he sees in different places on the offensive side of the ball. It's time to stop papering those over, right? I mean, that's the hope with Braun. I mean, the hope with Braun is that you're not going to have to paper those over, that you're going to be able to maul some people. And yeah, I mean, I think the stars you ripped off there are not Alabama level recruits, right? But they are top tier SEC recruits. If you don't factor in the fact that Bama has 4 5-star offensive line recruits every cycle, right? And so, yeah, maybe you're going to struggle to block against Alabama, but if you're as good at developing as you say you are, you ought to be able to get those guys and have them be elite offensive linemen for your program.
I'm just comparing it to the gold standard, but you see at other positions where Florida does put out those first round picks pretty regularly. It's not happening on the offensive line. So that's the one group I'd really hope they focus on. All right, let's move on to a dollar will. Gator great linebacker Tim PAULK passed away this past week at the age of 53. PAULK was a star linebacker on Steve Spurrier's first couple teams at the University of Florida. He earned first team All SEC honors in 1990, 1991, and was the finalist for the Butkus Award for the nation's top linebacker in his senior season. He came into Florida as a part of Galen Hall's 1987 class that was highlighted by Emmitt Smith, Brad Culpepper, and Miami Carroll High School teammate, linebacker at the time, switched to safety, Godfrey Miles. Miles was number 8 and PAULK was number 99. I love seeing those linebackers and safeties with 98 and 99, Will.
Yeah,
it's great sort of photos there.
Reminds you of sort of the Javon Curses and those sorts of people too, right? But I mean, PAULK, obviously, you go back and read stuff. So he's not a guy that I necessarily remembered when you mentioned him, but you go back and look at some of the old tape and you look at some of the combination, the way people who saw him play remember how big of a hitter he was as you sort of read some of the tributes. That's been a really fun thing to go back and read, though obviously not in sort of a somber way since he's passed away. The thing I really thought about is that he was somebody, like you said, he was recruited by Galen Hall. And it's a really interesting story. I'm not sure everybody remembers the story of Galen Hall. I mean, he comes in as a coordinator for Charlie Pell. Pell gets relieved because of recruiting violations, and then Hall gets relieved because of potential recruiting violations. But they were basically him sort of paying several of his own assistants out of his own pocket. And the University of Florida really didn't seem to think that was, I mean, it was sort of pressured into getting rid of him. So if you're a recruit who comes into play for Hall and this is going on and you're seeing all this stuff, granted Spurrier comes in, but Spurrier had a couple of winning seasons at Duke. So, it's not necessarily the slam dunk that we all think of it as today. And guys like PAULK and guys like Miles are guys who helped buy into that program. And yeah, Spurrier turned around the offense, but that defense was lights out in 88 and 89 as well. And then in 1990, when they finally had an offense, 90 and 91, those teams were really, really good because of the defense that had already been established. And Tim PAULK was a big part of that.
I spoke to Galen Hall last year when I was in the middle of my Charlie Pell pieces I wrote on readreaction.com, which I need to finish. I still got to finish those. That's my great unfinished project. But one of the interesting things he noted about the Emmitt Smith class, Coach Hall noted, I think it was the first class where they were back up to the full scholarship limit after they got hammered by the NCAA after the 1984 season. And so that class was a big part of getting Spurrier. I mean, the legend of Spurrier is unmatched because he came in from day one and was able to sprint. And part of the reason he's able to do that is because there was already a really good team on the field that Coach Hall left them. And it's like you said with Hall, a lot of that stuff, you go back into debate what's ticky-tack and what's political. And, oh, by the way, your Heisman Trophy winning quarterback is available to potentially come coach for you. There's a lot of things that probably went in. That's a story in and of itself. But Spurrier was able to get off to a fast start because guys like PAULK who came in. PAULK and Miles, by the way, Godfrey Miles, I thought that their story was interesting. They played at Miami Carroll City High School together, and they were dynamic. Their senior year of high school, Will, they combined for 256 tackles. and then they played together throughout their time at the University of Florida. Miles ended up going to get drafted by those early 90s Cowboys team and was on some Super Bowl teams. He also suffered an untimely death, massive heart attack at the age of 42, coincidentally there. But PAULK had been battling a disease from my understanding, what I read today. So, but
yeah, I think the big thing that I thought of is 30 years from now, who's going to be the guy that you would maybe compare that everybody now would have some idea? And you think about the coaching transition,
Right.
You think about a linebacker who's
all SEC, Will.
A guy who's now the guy I'm thinking of wasn't all SEC first team. He was all SEC second team, but I'm thinking David Reese. Right.
Yeah.
That's the guy who I think 30 years from now, people who saw Reese play will be that guy was the heartbeat of that defense in 2018 and 2019. And when he went out in 2018 against Kentucky, that's when the streak ended. Right. And so people who were there, people who watched will absolutely remember David Reese. Whereas I think 30 years from now, with some of the other linebackers who were sure to come through the program, you're not necessarily going to say, oh, he was the greatest linebacker in Florida history or anything like that. But I think, just sort of sitting back and thinking about it 30 years afterwards, after Spurrier's come in, how do people talk about PAULK? I think 30 years from now, maybe Reese would be a good comparison for how people would talk about him.
And that's exactly why I wanted to highlight PAULK, because even though you and I didn't sit there and watch every snap of the 1991 season, we were kids. Like I want to just, it makes you appreciate how good this program is, that a guy like PAULK can kind of get buried in the history a little bit. Because when you go back and look at him, you're like, wow, how did I not know much about this guy? And everything you read about him is fantastic. He loves to hit hard. His teammates loved him. I mean, he seemed like a great guy. Unfortunately, it seemed like he had an injury at the end of his career that kind of derailed his NFL career getting off the ground. So he never really got off the ground in the NFL, but great college career and just one of many great Gators that have come through. But just wanted to mention that because he did pass this week. So thoughts go out to Tim PAULK's family and friends out there. Will, that's it for today's episode. You got anything you want to say before we head out?
No, I think the big thing is again, everybody, thank you for subscribing to the YouTube channel. Please do that if you haven't had an opportunity to do that yet. There will be a Patreon version of this that goes up on our Patreon. So patreon.com/readandreaction. If you sign up there, you can get a longer frame version. This week we're talking about Urban Meyer and Steve Spurrier and getting the credit they deserve and all sorts of stuff like that. So it'll be fun. That's usually a little bit longer form, maybe 20, 25 minutes. But if you like this format, if you like Nick and I going back and forth, you can get more of that there.
All right. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to check us out next week. And like Will said, subscribe to that YouTube channel, Read and Reaction. We will be putting up new videos every single week. For Will Miles, I'm Nick Knutson. Go Gators. Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week, and check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knutson, joined by Will Miles, and as always, go Gators.